The nation of Canada has been suppressed on purpose. Its population is being killed off by the state through its assisted suicide program, and its population is changing through mass immigration against the will of the population. So that country is being held down on purpose. And my question is, by whom and why? You mentioned Canada. Most Americans don't even know the capital of Canada. Canada does not appear on their radar, doesn't figure in their thoughts. But you described it as probably, quote, probably the richest country in the world. I think that's objectively true. And yet Canada is not a rich country. In fact, it's getting poorer. Its life expectancy is declining. Its GDP is declining. And that's on purpose. The nation of Canada has been suppressed on purpose. Its population is being killed off by the state through its assisted suicide program, and its population is changing through mass immigration against the will of the population. So that country is being held down on purpose. And my question is, by whom and why?
Canada's broken because we're stupid.
Sure, that's a great question. And this is something that I struggle with all the time because I am a Canadian citizen. I went to school there. My answer is that Canada was never really a nation state. It's more of a glorified resource colony for the British, the city of London. And the reality is now that the British are under a lot of strain, the city of London is under a lot of financial pressure. It sees places like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And what do you do if you have financial issues? Well, you do corporate restructuring, right? You change the middle management, right? And historically, the British got along very well with the Indian elite, right? They went into India and stole trillions of dollars from the Indians, and the Indian elite were perfectly happy to help them, right? So why not use the same model for Australia, for Canada? So, there are millions of Indians who immigrated to Canada in the past 5 years, and it's put a lot of strain on the Canadian economy because housing prices have exploded, and so ordinary Canadians can no longer afford to buy a house. And it's put tremendous pressure on the Canadian welfare system, on the Canadian economy. And you would think that the proper strategy would have a moratorium where they're like, you know what, we've had too many immigrants and we need to close the borders and absorb these immigrants because we want to ensure that these immigrants have proper housing. They have decent jobs, right? You would think that that'd be the right strategy.
Yes.
And instead, Mark Carney goes to India and says, we want more Indians. And also, we'll give you scholarships to come to Canada to study for free. Meanwhile, there are a lot of Canadians who are homeless, who are unemployed, and who cannot put food on the table. But hey, we want more Indians. So if it's not corporate restructuring, if it's not trying to asset strip Canada, I really don't understand the strategy for this.
Well, I mean, it's a kind of genocide, right, against Canadians, people whose ancestors built the country. But you wonder what the purpose is. Like, this is because it is happening all over the West, all over the English-speaking world, in the white countries. And it's not an accident. It's not organic. So it's a big picture, that spans from Australia to Ottawa.
Oh, yeah.
Gang, we're going to flip over to CBC now and check out the Auditor General revealing some real reasons why Canada's failing. Let's take a peek.
Here to tell us more is Auditor General Karen Hogan. Thanks for coming on. Nice to see you.
Thanks for inviting me.
So your report raises some serious questions, I think, about the international student program. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of it for me is that the department may have turned a blind eye to fraud. You identified 800 cases of outright fraud. And the department, you found, did not consider acting in any of those instances. What does that say about how Ottawa is handling this file?
Who cares?
I think the first thing I'd want to say is that the department actually identified those 800 cases and then did not consider doing anything about it. And that's why one of the most concerning findings is how they're not acting on the information that they have. I would have expected here that they would have put a flag on a file or canceled a permit or done something so that when these individuals may apply for other permits, that they would apply some rigor at that point. But what we found is the majority of those 800 went on to apply for another permit, and about 50% of them have been approved since.
And there could be potentially more cases of fraud, because we know that, let's focus on another number, 150,000. That's how many students were flagged by their schools as potentially being non-compliant with some of the student permit conditions. The department, you found, investigated fewer than 4,000 of those more than 150,000 students. That kind of seems to me like a free-for-all situation, right? There's not really a lot of oversight going on here in terms of folks who maybe not fulfilling some of the conditions they have to meet. How would you characterize the oversight in those cases?
So again, it's one of those cases of not acting on the information that they had. So I think here the department told us that because of budget constraints, they could only investigate 2,000 a year. So then I would have expected lots of rigor in those 4,000 investigations that they did. But what we saw was about 40% of them, they closed the file. Because the students stopped communicating with them. So again, there's lots of things in the immigration department's toolkit that they can use to address this, right? They can either put a flag on an individual's file so that when they apply for another permit, you can be alerted, or they could cancel the permit and then inform the Canada Border Services Agency so that together they can decide the best course of action. That's not happening when you're not sharing information or acting on the information you have.
Yeah, the other thing that stuck out to me was that the government doesn't really know how many international students are actually staying or going, right? They've kind of lost track of whether these students are still in Canada when the permit is over. Tell me what you found out about that, because it seems like hundreds of thousands of student permits are issued every year, but the department really struggled to identify just how many are still here in this country. Mm-hmm.
So your third question's about the next area of them not acting on information that they have. What we found is that they weren't making a list of how many students had expired permits. So my audit team worked with the immigration department, said let's come up with that list, and we narrowed it down to about 39,000 students that had not yet applied for any other immigration status. So we then went to the Canada Border Services Agency and said, help us determine whether or not these individuals left the country. And we found that in 40% of the cases, CBSA could confirm they had left the country. So now it's up to the Immigration Department and the Border Services to decide what to do with that little over 23,000 that are left. But I would expect that they will take some action in order to determine whether or not these students should continue to be here, or if they should apply for another status, or if they should be removed.
So the government, CBSA, doesn't know where those other 23,500 students have gone? They're just,
well, they had no record of them leaving the country. Okay. So I think it is about, trying to communicate with them. And the Canada Border Service Agency couldn't do this on their own because the Immigration Department has the information. So they need to better collaborate and share. So we made that recommendation for them, and we gave the Immigration Department the work we did and said, here you go, you can repeat it and hopefully keep doing this on a regular basis to improve the integrity of the international student program.
I've read a lot of your reports over the years. I've read reports from your predecessors. This, frankly, to me, was one of the more damning ones. Literally, the conclusion, this is one sentence, and you say, we conclude that Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada was not effectively implementing reforms to the international student program. Not many more details than that needed, I guess. Do you have any confidence in the department to actually manage this file, given what you've uncovered about some of these incidents?
I think when you look back and look at what the reforms were meant to do, the key element of the reform was to reduce the number of temporary residents in the country in line with the immigration levels that had been decided. And a key element was reducing the number of international students. So a success in that they were able to do that, but the decline was so much sharper than they expected and resulted in some unintended consequences in some of the provinces. Some were expecting a 10% increase in permits, but saw a 60% decline. So I think this speaks to the need to collaborate with provincial counterparts and educational institutions to figure out if some of those reforms need to be adjusted. But then the integrity reforms are where I find they really are falling short. There's a lot of information they should be acting on to improve integrity, and we gave them recommendations, and I trust that they'll act swiftly on them.
So essentially their defense is that they didn't have enough money, manpower to keep I mean, I'm just going back to this 800 cases of fraud that you say they identified themselves, and they just let it happen. Like, it just seems kind of wild to me that a federal department would know that there's wrongdoing going on and they do essentially nothing about it. And then in some cases, they're applying for different immigration permits after the fact. Like, how do we even get to this point?
And I don't know if it's a matter of needing more funding. That was a decision made around how to allocate resources and only investigate 2,000 of the 153,000 students who were flagged as potentially non-compliant. What I would say is I expect the department will effectively use the resources it has now to see how much it can get through before it decides if it needs more resources to be able to protect the integrity of the program.
We'll wrap it up right there, gang. Let me know in the comments what you think about Tucker Carlson, JP Tasker, our Auditor General, Karen Hogan, all the issues we have in Canada. It's a strange time. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. Ciao for now. Get your Canadian federal politics right here.